everyone, my name is Daphne Milross, and today I'll be talking about the role of moral hazard in government bailouts. Here's a quick overview of what I'm going to cover today. We'll start by defining moral hazard and government bailouts, walking through a few examples, highlighting the consequences, and finally touching on some practical solutions. So let's start with the basics. Government bailout happens when a company performs poorly. This is often due to bad decision making, but the government steps in with taxpayer money to keep it alive, usually because its failure would cause widespread harm. This leads us to moral hazard. When someone is protected from the consequences of risks, they tend to take even riskier actions. In business, this often means reckless behavior because someone else, usually the government, will eventually absorb the fallout. So how do these two interact? Government bailouts can create incentivized risk-taking. For example, you can imagine this. If you have a 50-50 chance, either win or lose $1,000, you'd probably think a bit on that. But now imagine if you win, you get $1,000, but if you lose, then, well, someone else will just have to pay for it. Then it's a much easier decision. That's kind of essentially what happens when companies believe they're too big to fail. They take larger risks, knowing that the government and, in turn, taxpayers will likely have to foot the bill. The most famous example of this is the 2008 financial crisis. Risky lending practices, deregulated markets, and over-leveraged banks led to collapse. The Troubled Asset Relief Program, or TARP, shifted the burden to taxpayers, handing billions to banks and auto companies, all with the goal of avoiding economic collapse. But here's the key question, is that really fair? What this does is it creates a precedent. If one company gets saved, why not others? It also promotes short-termism and a focus on quarterly or current profits over long-term sustainability. Because if they fail, then they're expected to be rescued by the government. Let's talk more specifically about two companies, Boeing and GM. Boeing's 737 MAX was a disaster, poor engineering and safety feature issues, yet they're still operating today thanks to government contracts and the COVID relief funds that they received, but they haven't reformed their practices. Similarly, GM received a more formal bailout for mismanaging labor costs, and this bailout was not insubstantial. But today, those issues still persist. So what are they really learning from this? Unfortunately, not much. These bailouts often result in no substantial change. If a company doesn't feel the consequences of its failure, it has no real reason to change. Moral hazard removes the consequences, which in turn weakens their accountability. So, what are the broader consequences? From an economic perspective, risky strategies become even more normalized. Competition drives even stable companies to take on more risks. Additionally, resource misallocation happens. Funds that could be put towards healthcare or infrastructure are spent on failing companies, which promotes long-term instability as we're focusing on propping these companies up in the short term. From a political perspective, it's unfair. It reinforces the too big to fail mindset, making it harder to regulate these industries in the future. Socially, it creates public frustration. Everyday people are held responsible for their mistakes, but larger corporations, often they're not, and even it's forced on the everyday people. So what can we do? I'm not saying we should eliminate bailouts completely. I can recognize that sometimes they're necessary, but we need to reel in bailouts with stricter rules. First, there should be stronger regulation, like higher capital requirements for banks or caps on executive pay. And beyond that, we should simply allow more companies to fail, as failure in itself sends a powerful message and is sometimes necessary for these companies. And finally, most obviously, we should be monitoring the risk that these companies are taking. So, to wrap up, here are a few key takeaways. That bailouts almost always create moral hazard, that hazards often result in no major change, that the consequences are broad, economic, political, and social, and finally, solutions do exist. They don't need to be extreme, they just need to be forward-looking and fair. So thank you all for listening, and here are a list of all of my sources.